This is a slightly ageist presentation, I'm afraid, because I've realised that anyone under my sort of age may not recognise either the joke or the photograph. What I wanted to do today was to talk a bit about actual information in IAG rather than advice and guidance, and something that we've been doing to try and increase the amount of information. Talking very quickly about us, I'm going to gabble a bit, I'm afraid, because I've only got 20 minutes, and that, I fear, will go very quickly. bestCourse4me is the organisation that I'm representing. It's a charity. There are no charges at any point to use it. There are no adverts. The funding comes strictly from two sources. One is privately supported by philanthropy, and the other one is we get a small amount of support from Microsoft, who provide us with web services free of charge. But there's no charge and there's no vested interests in this. Although what I'm going to talk about is higher education information, actually bestCourse4me is really a social mobility charity. We believe that lack of information about the benefits and the reality of higher education is a big inhibitor for kids who are bright, motivated, and in the general sense completely qualified to go to university, but don't have the social and information context to understand what a benefit that is, or occasionally what a disadvantage it is, and therefore don't get the benefit of higher education. There are many issues in IAG at the moment. I'm all too aware of the discomfort of the current government reorganisations, but what I want to talk about today is information, not advice or guidance, or indeed the general state of the IAG activity. There is, of course, a huge amount of information out there, but broadly I would suggest that an awful lot of it is essentially subjective, and the vast majority of what's supplied to you is focused, if you like, on the university experience, rather than the broader context in which it sits. So the National Student Survey is almost by definition subjective. Union View, which I'm a big fan of, nobody seems to have heard of it, but it provides videos about the reality of doing a particular degree at a particular university. It is very good. Push is sort of a mixture. The student room is more or less a bunch of chat rooms with some structured information around. And there is, of course, one hard information site, which is Unistats. Now, somewhere in my past, I'm a database theorist, and I don't have a problem with Unistats. At least I can use it. It doesn't tell me everything I want to know. But my understanding is that it's not particularly well received. There's a new, safer version of Google Chrome. I'd prefer you not to bother me if that's really all right with you. Thank you. Anyway, Unistats doesn't seem to be much loved at any level in IAG. So what do we think? Think AG should be supported by information that is reliable and comprehensible, complete enough to give a useful impression, and covers all the important areas. Now, I'd suggest that when you're talking to a kid who's considering A-levels or a degree, actually it ought to be a much broader conversation than which university has is the most fun to go to or has the cheapest beer, or even than the university itself. It's a broader, long-term, life-structuring set of decisions that child is making. And while there is a lot of information out there, much of it's subjective, most of it is focused on the university itself. And it's not a long-term view of what happens. The information then also has to be easily available. And we think that this hasn't been done as well as it should have been. Could have been. Let me say could have been. The particular area that we identified as being less good than it might be was information to do with the transfer from an academic life to a career and what happens to you. and how you get on to the appropriate academic course to then follow the career that you've thought about. And we created the website to deal with that issue. It provides information that we don't believe is available anywhere else in two particular areas. The first one is it goes all the way from A-levels to lifetime job and salary. So for a degree subject, you can see the statistical salary profile for the rest of your life. And we do that through something called the Labour Force Survey, which no one has ever quite realised before you could use to gather that information. The other thing we've done, which is new, is that we've managed to get from the Higher Education Statistics Authority information about the A-levels actually held by undergraduates starting on courses. And that's important because it varies interestingly from the advice given by universities and then reflected through the rest of the information chain. The broad nature of the way in which it differs is along this direction. The Russell Group tend to understate what they're really looking for. The teaching universities overstate it. Now, people who've been in this game for a long time, I'm sure will recognise that, but we've actually got numbers. There are also A-levels which are not required. That is, they are prepared to look at your application if you don't have that A-level, but the huge majority of students have it. And the other way around, actually, there are A-levels which are genuinely not required, even though you'd think they might be. The main guides, people like Brian Heap's excellent document, of course use the information that's available to them. And there's no criticism of Brian here. I think it's a fantastic effort. But the information that they are given by the universities is not necessarily everything that you need to know. So what I want to do now quickly is go through how that information is provided and the sort of thing you can get out of it. So this is what the main page looks like. And you can see there are 4 tabs, one that talks about A-levels. So those are A-levels that you might consider doing. There are none selected there. Degrees, universities, subsequent careers. And then on this tab, all of the information that you've put together looking through the other tabs comes together in one page that you can then print. And you go away with between about 5 and 15 pages of very detailed information from the search summary page. There's comments, there's links to supporting advice and so on. But the main area of interest is this middle bit. So you can see here, I've previously selected a psychology degree at Anglia Ruskin University, and what it's giving me is the A-levels and similar qualifications held by people who started on that degree in order of the popularity of them. So you can see 87% of undergraduates had a qualification in psychology when they started on the course, and of that, 99% of them were actually A-levels or Scottish Highers. 39% was the next most popular for general studies, and actually slightly over half of that was not an A-level. So that will be an AS probably, but it might be something else. Sorry, by A-level I tend to mean A2. 27% sociology, biology, English literature, and so on. All of the other tabs look essentially similar. Down the left-hand side there's things you can choose. The right-hand side tends to have graphs and pie charts and things like that, showing you the statistics for what you've chosen. So let's go into 1 or 2 examples. This one shocked me. Cambridge tends to have official offers like A-star AA. When I say anecdotally, this is from the admissions tutor at Churchill. The median, that is the single largest group of undergraduates with the same qualification, for Churchill in 2011 was 4 A-stars. So when they say A star AA, you need to think quite carefully about, if you've got an A star AA student, are they really going to get in to Churchill? Churchill, by the way, is not Cambridge's, doesn't think of itself as Cambridge's most academic college. So, here's an example, maths. 2012, page 423, Warwick actually comes at the top of the list with A star AAA to AABA. Cambridge is shown as A star AA for which is 380 points, but they take STEP as well, which I guess you all know is a much more difficult maths assessment test. Actually, if you talk globally, Cambridge undergraduate maths is arguably the most demanding undergraduate maths course in the world. Princeton might argue with that, but broadly they don't come any tougher than the Cambridge undergraduate course. And the actual UCAS points held is 600, not 380. And that's the average. So you will have some kids who are a bit lower than that. Of course, you'll have some kids who are rather higher than that. That's quite an achievement, more than 600 UCAS points. Warwick is 540. That's still extraordinarily high. I mean, to be fair, the Warwick kids are obviously very bright. But the implied order, which is Cambridge quite some way below Warwick, is misleading. So here's maths at Warwick. Everyone's got further maths. They're almost all A's, but there are some B's there. Everyone's got maths. Actually, those are just placeholders. It's 100% A's, quite right too. Actually, there's a decent chunk of B's in physics, and only 80% have got physics, 51% chemistry, and again a decent chunk of B's there. So that's for Warwick. If we replace that with Cambridge, 100% further maths, all A's. 100% maths, all A's. 100% physics, all A's. 67% chemistry, pretty much all A's. Please remember that because these are historical, we don't have access to meaningful A-star data yet because it's just not been around long enough. So you just, obviously over the next 2 or 3 years, A-star will appear as a meaningful statistical group, and we'll encourage that, but we'll include that. Just a bit more on the user interface. If you hover over these bars, it gives you a breakdown. So mathematics, 100% got A. Had I shown you one of the other bars, it would have told you all of the other grades and what the percentages were. At the other end of the spectrum, the story is quite different. And there aren't, frankly, all that many Cambridge maths candidates. The world just isn't built like that. But the teaching universities overstating their requirements, I suspect, puts quite a lot of kids off who shouldn't be put off. The teaching universities do a fantastic job and are a very important part of the education system and should be open to everyone with the actual ability that they require. So if we look at Derby, HEAP says 180 to 240 points. That's about DDD to CCC, and this is for a maths degree. Okay, so you would expect maths to be, well, at least C, D at a real push. Actually, the reality is 26 have a D and 13% have an E. So while you might, one bit of me says that's a curious basis on which to do a maths degree, another bit of me is saying if you've got a kid who wants to work hard and that's their ability and they want to do maths, why not put them up for Derby? They might not get 3 C's, but the evidence is they don't need 3 C's. So look at what the institution actually admitted. Further maths, 21% got further maths. I guess as you all know, further maths is quite a lot tougher than ordinary maths, requires a much more mathematical style of thinking, a lot more analysis of problems. All D's and E's in further maths. Given that profile, that makes absolute sense. It's quite easy to get a D in further maths and an A in maths. Okay, another sciencey one, because the distinctions tend to be quite stark here. Physics at Oxford, again, is shown as A star AA. The actual UCAS points is 560, which is 4 A stars if you take it as A2s. That makes sense, yeah. Actually, what this tends to suggest, the other unknown, I went and investigated that, a lot of those are EPQs, which are these extended self-structured projects, as a way of distinguishing the brightest kids. But, yeah, 100% A, 100% A, about 95% A, and about 97% A in further maths. Slightly surprised that's not 100%. You do occasionally get surprises. I'm really surprised that's 24%. Actually, that particular degree requires a lot of maths, and further maths would be an enormous help. If we look at physics at Hull, again, Heat, page 494, suggests 260 to 320, which is BCC to ABB, roughly. Actually, 46% have a D or an E in physics, and 43% have a D or an E in maths. That's, again, if you've got someone who loves physics but is not academically up to the very highest standards, don't give up. BCC to ABB is not what they actually take. But about 80% of the undergraduates have actually A-levels. They don't have other qualifications. So, you know, if you want to do a BTEC instead of an A-level, it's probably not a good move. Just statistically, that doesn't look like the answer. Chemistry, it's probably okay. But the core maths and physics have to be A-levels. I hope what you're getting is an impression that you can infer a great deal about the reality of getting into a university just from looking at these statistics. Let's move out of sciences. You know, I'm a scientist, so I'm always more comfortable with maths and physics and stuff like that. But let's go off into some other areas. Law degrees. So what I've got here is I've chosen the three broad classes of law degree: law by topic, area, or just broad law. But I haven't chosen a university. So these are A-level statistics for all law degrees across the whole UK university spectrum. 39% of undergraduates have a law qualification going in, almost entirely A-levels. Probably helps, but it clearly isn't mandatory. History is 39, English literature 30, psychology, general studies, maths down there at 22. So what happens if you try, instead of the broad spectrum, what do the most demanding places expect? Do they want a higher proportion of law A-levels? And the answer is no, it's much, much lower. 56% history, 54% maths. Actually, having dealt with some innumerate lawyers, I'm a huge fan of that. You know, there is a proportion of the legal profession that needs A-level maths and doesn't have it. Economics, English literature, law's not even on the screen. And if I could grab that and scroll down, we'd find it, and it's at 14%. It's about 8th or 9th on the list. If you look at King's College London, it's 19%. So actually, as you go up, the requirement for law A-level goes away rather than becomes stronger. Maybe everybody knows this and there's no element of surprise, but I thought that was slightly counterintuitive. And one last one on A-levels, psychology at the University of Durham. Only 61% have a psychology A-level, but it is almost entirely A-levels. General studies, English literature, biology, that's a good one. History, and again, maths. And finally, I've majored on the A-level stuff because that's the information that helps you with kids to get them into the right course and to suggest universities that they might actually be able to get into. So I suspect that deals more immediately with the kinds of things that you have to cope with day to day. But I really do think that these conversations need to be held in the context of where the A-levels and then the degree are taking you. So here's a particularly stark example. The green line here is lifetime salary profile for engineering graduates. Yeah? The orange line is the same thing for fine art graduates. And for those of you who've seen trick graphs before, that is the 0 line. So in other words, the engineering graduates over their lifetime earn almost exactly double, almost double at every stage what the fine art graduates earn. Now if you've got a kid who is passionate about art, that that's what their life is about, that's what they want to do, that's wonderful. And I wouldn't for a moment suggest that you try and talk them out of it. But I think it's only fair to point out to them that their lifetime salary expectation is going to peak at about 27,000 a year in their 40s. On average, there's always art dealers who make millions, but there are lots of people teaching in nursery schools who don't get to the 27,000 a year point. So I'm not actually a science and technology advocate, but I think people ought to know where they're going. Actually, if you want the biggest sort of routine salaries, it's pilots and doctors. But pilots come out around the 90,000 mark by the time they're in their mid-30s. There are all sorts of other issues with getting into being a pilot, like you normally need 50 grand to put into the project. But that's another story. So I hope I've given you a quick tour of enough interesting facts to make you think that there might be something in these statistics, and a little bit of how the site works. I think this gap is important. I think this overall lifetime context and the reality of university admissions is worth providing to IAG people, to careers advisors, and to the students themselves and their families to help them make decisions. We are almost entirely a website charity. The only other thing that we get involved in is I go around and rattle for the release of data as much as possible. So I'm on a Department of Business Innovation and Skills data sharing working group and stuff like that. And it's really tough going, particularly with UCAS actually. They're very reluctant to release anything. But we have got the A-level data out. We believe HESA are going to release GCSE data, so we can extend that decision support information right back to GCSEs. But the huge majority of what we do is the website. If we're lucky, the GCSE data will be up in 12 months' time, so next cycle you can have GCSE data. And the fundamental message is we believe this stuff is important. It gives you context to support the students in their decisions. So, questions? And just to return to the opening joke, for those of you who grasped it, go on, make my day. There are memory sticks, by the way, as freebies down there and some cards if anyone wants a bit more information, or indeed a free memory stick. I think there's a mic heading your way.
Sorry, when was the information updated on there? Well, wait, is that from last year?
Yes, we've got the information goes back 8 years. So it's blended 8-year data. If we don't use that number of years of data, we wind up with a lot of courses who have so few people, and we can't give statistical information without it breaking the data protection rules. Because you could, in principle, I can't imagine why anyone would bother, but in principle you could work out data for individuals.
And is it updated every year, so
Yeah.
we can take into consideration?
Yeah, we add each new year, we add the year to the data collection. Hang on, Kurt.
Is there anything specific on there about the international backing, or is that just divided into the A-levels and the extended?
At the moment it's not shown on the website. We have that information in the underlying database, but we don't show it yet. We've just been through a very big technology rebuild, and I'm hoping that changes that are visible at the surface will now come fairly rapidly, and I'm intending to break that stuff out. It'll actually come out. You remember the careers tab, career summary tab that you could print? It'll come out on there. So we'll give a much higher resolution breakdown of what the contents of the A-levels and the others are.
Do those figures, sorry, over here, do those figures include the students who go through clearing as well?
The students who?
Go through clearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's HESA. That end of the information is Higher Education Statistics Authority for undergraduates who start on a course. So they not only go through clearing, they physically show up. And in fact, they finish. So there is a survivor bias issue there. I could make an argument that the survivor bias issue is helpful. What's the point in knowing what qualifications will get you on only to get thrown off again? But that is to some extent post-fact rationalisation.
Was there any information on there about the national diploma route? You sort of concentrated on A-levels. Is there any information about national diplomas?
We've got the information in the database. We chose to focus on A-levels because our education, my background is business and computing and things like that. The person doing the academic thinking about this is Anna Vignoles, who's a Professor of Education at the Institute of Education and the London School of Economics. Her view on this is that universities, almost all of the universities, look more at A-levels than diplomas, and we ought to concentrate on that first. It is our intention to break that information out later. Yeah, I'm sorry, we've only got a fixed amount of money and there's only so much we can do. Anyone else?
Do you have any promotional material that I can use in school, give out to students and that sort of thing?
Yep. If you go onto the website, there are posters and stuff you can print, and we can send you some stuff. There's contacts on the website. We also, with Push, do schools visits. And you can have a schools visit on one of two bases. If you're a successful high-flying school, we need you to cover our costs. If you are an underperforming school or a highly performing school in an area with a high level of social deprivation, then we'll come and do that for nothing. Okay? Coming back to, fundamentally, we're a social mobility charity. It's about genuinely giving real opportunity to kids who don't come from the right background. And if we benefit a load of other people along the way, that's great, but that's the focus of what we're doing. Are we out of questions? Oh, not quite.
It's a challenging question. You mentioned 4 websites that are subjective in the data.
Yep.
Is yours subjective or objective?
No, it's absolutely objective. There is no modification of the data. There is no advice, there's no opinion. All it is statistics. And being government statistics, occasionally you look at it and you think, that's a bit odd. Particularly, something odd happened in the labour force survey categories in 2004 and 5. And if you look at the graphs, you can see funny spikes. But it's absolutely statistics, and there's no advice, no guidance, it's supporting information.
Thank you.
How are we doing? I promise I'm a nicer chap than him. Okay, more or less bang on time. Thank you very much.